Welcome to Horror Sector. Tonight, we venture into the realm between life and death, where forgotten souls linger in purgatory, waiting for someone to remember them. These are not fictional tales, but real experiences from people who dared to communicate with the other side. Some found protection in their darkest hours, while others faced terrifying consequences for breaking their promises. What happens when the dead answer your prayers? What price must be paid for their help? Turn off the lights, silence your phone, and prepare yourself. Because once you hear these stories, you'll never look at a flickering candle the same way again. It is said that the souls in purgatory are those who have not yet found rest. According to popular belief, they are neither in heaven nor in hell. That's why many people light candles for them, leave water, and ask them for favors, because it is believed that when one helps them, they can also help others. My family is very devoted to the souls in purgatory. For as long as I can remember, people have always prayed for them or said rosaries for them. Every November 2nd, they also leave offerings for them. They say you have to pray for them, especially for the most forgotten souls. My mother says that this custom comes from her grandfather, my great-grandfather. He was also very religious. Every night he would pray for the souls, light his candle, leave a little water, and ask them to rest in peace. He never asked for anything for himself. He only prayed that God would release them from their suffering. But one early morning, many years ago, my great-grandfather experienced something the family never forgot, something that became a local legend. My great-grandfather lived on a ranch on the outskirts of a rural town in Oaxaca. He was a countryman, like most men of that time. He lived with his wife and 3 young children. Most of the time, he returned from work very late. During the day, he worked as a shoemaker, and in the evening, he tended to and fed animals on a farm. He was very serious, but they say he had a kind heart. He never spoke ill of anyone and always prayed to God for the souls in purgatory. One morning, around 2 a.m., he was returning from work. He took the shortest route, a path through the countryside with no house, no light, just grass. He was riding a horse with an oil lamp hanging from its neck. The path was dark. He could hear owls hooting and occasionally the neighing of his horse. It was a very quiet, solitary night, since no one else was passing by. As he rode on, he saw 2 men emerge from the trees. Both men had their faces covered with bandanas and were carrying machetes. One of them yelled at him, "Get down, old man. Hand over the money and the horse if you don't want trouble." My great-grandfather wasn't a quarrelsome man. He told them to calm down, that he only had a little money, what he had earned that day. But the men came closer. One of them pointed his machete at him and repeated that he had to get down. My grandfather thought he had no other choice. He was alone in the middle of the field with no one to help him. He started to dismount, but at that moment something very strange happened. First, he heard some distant wailing, followed by voices that grew clearer. The assailants heard them too. They all looked around trying to see if anyone was approaching, but they were alone. There was no one in sight. My grandfather's horse became more restless and began to move on its own. The air felt heavy, cold, colder than that early morning. And suddenly, from behind my grandfather, seemingly out of nowhere, several men appeared, riding horses, about 15 or more of them. My grandfather thought they were more like bandits, but one of them spoke loudly to the bandits. "Good evening, friend. What can I do for you? Are you going to let us pass, or will you face the consequences? You decide." The bandits froze. One of them said, "Let's get out of here," and they rode off into the woods until they were out of sight. My great-grandfather breathed a sigh of relief. He turned around to thank them all, but none of them seemed familiar, nor were they from the village. Somewhat nervously, he urged his horse forward. A few steps. My great-grandfather stopped and turned to thank them once more, but when he looked back, there was no one there. He couldn't see a soul, nor could he hear them leave. The road was completely empty. My great-grandfather stood still for a while, puzzled. The horse was still trembling, and he felt a chill run down his spine. He continued on his way home without looking back. When he arrived, his wife saw how pale he was. She asked him what was wrong, but he only replied, "The spirits kept me company tonight." The next day, he went to give thanks. He lit several candles and prayed for hours. He thanked the souls for having protected him. From then on, every time he left home, before mounting his horse, he would always cross his knees and say, "May the souls in purgatory accompany me." Over the years, that story became very well known locally. My mother told it many times when we were children. I always thought my grandmother Rosa was a strange woman. Not strange in a bad way, but different. For as long as I can remember, she was very devoted to the souls in purgatory. Every Monday, without fail, she lit a candle for them in the center of her living room. She said it was her way of helping them find peace. Her house was an old house with high ceilings and cracked walls. She had lived alone since my grandfather died, but she said she never felt lonely, that they, the souls, kept her company. As a child, I didn't understand what she meant, but over the years, many neighbors began to tell strange stories about her. For example, the man who lived across the street insisted that every Monday night around 10 o'clock, he saw movement outside my grandmother's windows, shadows moving from room to room as if they were walking inside. It was as if she were having a small gathering, but my grandmother was old. She didn't have gatherings, and she could barely move around the house. Her next-door neighbor also complained a lot. Every time we arrived with my grandmother, she would confront us. She told us that every Monday she heard footsteps and loud voices, and laughter from Grandma's house kept us awake because it happened in the wee hours of the morning. They didn't believe us when we said she lived alone and didn't have gatherings or parties, much less in the middle of the night. We asked Grandma, but she said she was always alone, that maybe they were listening to her spirits. I thought they were exaggerating, but years later, when I was finally able to visit Grandma on my own, something happened that changed my way of thinking. It was a Monday, to be exact. I remember it had been raining since early. The light was coming and going. In the afternoon, my mom asked me to go check on Grandma because she wasn't answering her phone. So I walked over. It was around 7:30 at night. When I got there, I noticed I could hear voices inside. There were a lot of them, like my grandma was at a party. They weren't clear voices, they were murmurs, like a lot of people were talking quietly and others were laughing. I stood still in the doorway for a few seconds. The sound was coming from the inside, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I knocked again, harder. That's when the noise suddenly stopped. Everything was silent. I heard my grandmother's footsteps followed by, "Who's at the door?" I told her it was me and asked if she needed anything. When she opened the door, she greeted me with a smile. She told me to come in and that there was an audience. What a surprise. The house was completely empty. I asked my grandmother what she was doing before she opened the door. She led me into the living room and told me she was praying to their blessed souls. She told me that if I didn't mind, she would continue her prayers. She knelt in front of a small table with a rosary in her hands. Her eyes were closed, and she murmured a prayer very slowly, so softly that I could barely understand. I couldn't believe what I had heard, and I was speechless. I could only see my grandmother praying for those souls. As I watched closely, the candlelight flickered, and it seemed as if shadows were moving behind her, but there was no one else there. I froze. A chill ran through my body. When I spoke to her, she didn't answer right away. She seemed deep in thought, as if she didn't want to be interrupted. Then, without looking up, she said in a calm voice, "I think they've arrived." I didn't know what to say. "Who is it, grandmother?" She clutched the rosary in her fingers and answered calmly, "The souls came to thank me." I didn't have the courage to tell her that they had been with her for some time. I went back home. The next day when I got back to my mom, Grandma was having breakfast as if nothing had happened. We asked her if anyone had been with her the night before, and she said no, that she had only felt presences around her as usual. She told us that for years, when she lights a candle, she feels a very strange company, as if the air fills with energy. She has never seen anything, but she says she feels it clearly. She says we shouldn't be afraid of them, that they are souls seeking rest, and that as long as there is someone to light a candle for them, they won't be losses. But it does scare me. This was one of my strongest paranormal experiences. My name is Veronica. I'm 38 years old, and I want to tell you something that marked me for always. I lived in a small house in the southern part of the state of Mexico, in a quiet neighborhood. I lived alone with my daughter Adelia, who was 13 at the time. Her father had left us when she was born. He simply left and never came back for us. From then on, the two of us managed on our own. I worked at a small grocery store in the mornings and made meals to sell in the afternoons. We never had much, but we never lacked anything either. I always considered myself a woman of faith. I am Catholic, and I have had a great devotion to the souls in Purgatory since I was very young. My grandmother taught me that if you pray for them, the souls can help you when you need it most. But I never imagined what I would have to live through. It all started one morning like any other. Delia got up early to go to high school. I made her lunch before leaving for work and said goodbye with a kiss on her forehead. But that afternoon she didn't come back. At first I thought she had stayed to chat with her friends, or that maybe they had dance rehearsal. But when 5 o'clock came and she hadn't returned, I started to worry. I called several of her classmates' mothers, and none of them knew anything. They said she had gone out as usual. I went out to look for her in the nearby streets, at the little store where she sometimes bought candy, at the bus stop. No one had seen her. When night fell, despair took hold. The worst thoughts came to me, that she had been kidnapped, that something had happened to her, but no one had called. No one was asking for money, nothing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. That night I spoke to my whole family, my sister, my mother, my cousins, everyone. We all went out to look, but there was no trace. We went to the prosecutor's office, but the police told us they couldn't take the case until 72 hours had passed, that we had to wait, that sometimes they ran off with friends. But my daughter wasn't like that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed on the couch looking at her picture and the sports uniform she had folded and left on the chair. I lay awake, not knowing what to do. Around 2 p.m. the next day, sleep overtook me. I woke up around 8 p.m., crying. No one knew anything yet. No one had called. Despair was already a knot in my stomach. That's when I remembered the souls in purgatory. So I went to the kitchen, lit a white candle, and placed it on the altar I had next to an image of Our Lady of Purgatory. I knelt down and began to pray. I wasn't asking for comfort, only for help in bringing my daughter back alive. I prayed so much so that I lost track of time. When I checked the time, it was almost midnight. But while I was praying, I felt something strange, a calm, an odd calm that washed over my whole body, and the air began to feel strange. It was a difficult sensation to explain. It wasn't fear, but something that made my skin tingle. Then I became incredibly sleepy. I could barely get up and walk to my bed. I didn't even cover myself. I fell asleep in seconds. And it was then that I had a dream. In the dream, everything was dark. I was walking through a neighborhood that seemed familiar. Although I couldn't quite place it, there were unpaved streets, vacant lots, properties for sale, and in front of me, 3 silhouettes walking. They had no faces or defined shapes. They seemed made of white smoke, but they walked slowly, as if waiting for me. I followed them. They didn't speak, but I knew they wanted to show me something. We passed houses, yellow streetlights, dogs barking in the distance. Everything felt too real. The air on my face. We arrived at a house under construction at the edge of a neighborhood that was just starting to be populated. That house had a closed black gate. The place gave me a bad feeling. The 3 figures stopped in front of the door and pointed at something. At the back of the house was a metal lid like a cistern. One of the shadows bent down, opened it, and showed me something inside. It was my daughter. She was tied to a chair. I screamed in my sleep, and at that very moment I woke up. It was 5 in the morning. I didn't hesitate for a second. I grabbed a jacket and went outside. I ran into the street. Nearby, I found a patrol car parked. I approached, almost shouting, "Officer, please, I need help. I know where my daughter is." The police officers looked at me in surprise. One of them took the radio and asked for backup. I didn't say I'd had a dream. I just told them I had information about the location. Luckily, one of them agreed to come with me. They drove quickly to a neighborhood I mentioned, which, by the way, I could barely remember. As soon as we turned onto the main avenue, my blood ran cold. It was just like in the dream, the same lights in the same place, the same empty lots. I told them to stop. There was the house with the black gate, just as the figures had shown it to me. One of the police officers told me they couldn't enter without a warrant, but I couldn't wait any longer. I ran out of the car to knock on the door, but when I got there, it was open, ajar. I pushed it open and ran inside. The house was empty, covered in dust, without furniture, without a sound. The police officers followed me, shining their flashlights on me. I had never been to this house before, but it was exactly as I had dreamed it. So I went straight to the back, where there was a metal hatch in the floor, but it was locked. I could hear faint screams coming from down there, so one of the police officers took out a lockpick he used for emergencies and opened it in less than 2 minutes. He shone his light down, and the 3 of us saw her at the same time. It was my daughter. Her hands and feet were tied to a chair with a cloth bag over her head. She was thrashing and crying. The police officers rushed downstairs. They managed to free her and carried her inside. I hugged her so tightly I could barely breathe. She was crying and trembling, but she was alive. They took us straight to the prosecutor's office. My daughter didn't remember much. She said a white van intercepted her on her way home from school, but they pulled her inside without letting her see who they were, and then everything went dark. They didn't mistreat her or ask for someone's number. They just left her locked inside, and no one came back for days. Something curious happened too. She remembered that hours before I arrived to pick her up, she suddenly heard a woman's voice whisper in her ear, "Your mom's coming." But she never heard the lock unlock or anyone come downstairs. The authorities investigated the house, but the owners never appeared. The neighbors said it had been abandoned for years, that no one lived there. After that, I moved. I couldn't stay in the same neighborhood. I spent years unable to sleep, plagued by nightmares and terrified that they would take my daughter again, but also certain that the souls had brought her back. I'm not a very religious person, but in my family, we've always talked about the souls in purgatory. My mother and aunts said they were miraculous, that if you pray to them and ask, they'll help you with whatever you need. So a few years ago, I decided to try it. I was 27 at the time. I lived in Ecatepec with my husband in a 2-story house. We were newlyweds, without children yet. I was a housewife and had a lot of free time, so I thought it wouldn't be difficult, nothing but praying for them for a little while each day. An aunt gave me a special prayer for the most forgotten souls. She told me to say it every day. I did it at 8 p.m., always at the same time with a candle. That's what I did. The first few nights, everything was normal. I lit a candle, put a glass of water on it, and prayed in a low voice. Sometimes my husband was watching TV and would jokingly say to me, "You're going to talk to your spirits now, aren't you?" I just laughed. For 2 whole weeks, I didn't miss a single night, not a single day. But like everything, I started to get tired of it. There were days I forgot, others I simply didn't feel like it. I didn't know that this could have consequences. One Tuesday after dinner, I decided not to do it, and that's where it all began. That same night, already in bed, it wasn't as late as 11. I heard someone walking downstairs. My husband was asleep next to me, but the footsteps were slow, firm, and made a sound on the tile floor. I got up to look from the stairs, but there was no one there. I only noticed one thing. The altar candle was out, although I could swear I had left it lit. I went back to sleep, but it was hard to fall asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was standing near the bed. The next day, the atmosphere in the house felt heavy. Even my husband, who was a skeptic, noticed it. It was as if the air were colder than usual, even though the weather wasn't cold enough. I turned on the radio to distract myself. I was doing my daily chores when, soon, without me touching it, the station changed. The voice cut out and began to sound like static, but with jumbled words. That night I tried to pray again, but something stopped me. When I tried to light the matches, they wouldn't stay lit. It was as if someone were blowing on them. It wasn't the air, because I covered them, and it still happened. I felt such a strong chill that I wanted to run out of the house. My husband said it was just my nerves, that I was imagining things, but he started noticing it too. I would light a match, but it would only burn for a short time before someone would blow it out. Days passed like this, and the paranormal activity began to increase. One time I was sweeping in the kitchen when I saw out of the corner of my eye a shadow cross from the bathroom into the living room. My husband was at work, and I was completely alone. I went to check, but there was no one there, except for one detail. The glass of water I had placed on the altar a few hours earlier was completely empty. I don't know how that could have happened. Something else happened that morning. While I was sleeping, my husband woke me up, startled, because he said he felt someone sit at the foot of the bed. He got up to turn on the light, scared. When we went back to bed, we heard a wail. It was like a woman's wail coming from downstairs. It didn't last long, but it was enough to keep us both from sleeping peacefully all night. The next day, I managed to sleep for a while in the afternoon, but the paranormal followed me even into my dreams. I dreamt I was in the living room praying in front of the altar, but I wasn't alone. Behind me were many people. They were standing, all still, all pale, looking at me. In front of me was a woman dressed in black, with a wrinkled face and a very serious, almost angry expression. I woke up drenched in sweat with a terrible headache. That night, my husband asked me what was wrong, and I told him about the dream. He said that in the early morning he had felt someone pulling at his blanket. A Saturday was the worst day. Early on, there were banging noises upstairs, like someone was walking in heavy boots. The fan would turn on by itself, the doors would sometimes slam, and the air felt cold, thick, and awful. While I was washing the dishes, trying to ignore all these problems, the radio turned on by itself and started playing static, like someone was breathing on the other side. Another strange thing that happened was that the street dogs wouldn't stop barking at the door. That time, just as I was about to go upstairs in the bedroom, a black shadow crossed from wall to wall and disappeared in front of me. When my husband arrived, he tried to calm me down, but that night was the worst. At 3 a.m., we were awakened by a horrible scream. It wasn't from inside or outside the house, it was as if it was coming from the ceiling. Right after that, we heard rapid footsteps on the downstairs stairs, as if someone wanted to go upstairs. My husband went down with a bat, but he didn't find anything. I was trembling, sitting on the bed, and there, right behind me, I heard a sigh. It was so clear that we both turned around at the same time. That's when I couldn't take it anymore. Nervous, trembling with fear, I burst into tears. I started praying the Lord's Prayer several times, and only then did things calm down. The next day I couldn't stand it anymore. I felt watched all the time. The house was cold, the lights sometimes turned on by themselves, and the appliances turned on by themselves too. The house was infested with paranormal activity, with ghosts. That night we decided to sleep in a motel that was near the house. Once I was in my room, my mom called me, and I answered. I started telling her what was happening, and she confidently told me it was the souls in purgatory who were angry with me for not saying my prayers. I hung up, a little nervous but calm, because I knew I would sleep well that night. I never imagined that the souls in purgatory were still with me. That night, I had barely lain down when I felt someone climb on top of me. I couldn't move or scream. I felt like a dead person had climbed on top of me. My eyes were open. I could see my husband was asleep beside me, but above me was a figure, a beautiful young woman. She was floating, screaming silently. I felt myself being moved, but I didn't react. When I finally managed to get up, my whole body ached. I cried all night. I didn't want to go back to sleep. The next day, the same aunt advised me to go to church. I told her everything, and she said the same thing, that it was because I had left the souls unfulfilled, that they also get angry when one doesn't keep their promises. I went to Mass, took new candles, and I asked for forgiveness. That same night, I prayed again, trembling, but I did it. My husband and I apologized, telling them it wasn't our intention to bother them, that we wouldn't pray anymore, but that we hoped they were at peace. Since then, everything has returned to normal. Several years have passed, and I still remember this story with enormous fear. I learned that when you begin to deal with the souls of the departed, you must do so with faith and respect, because if you forget them, they will make sure to remind you. The boundary between our world and the next is thinner than we imagine. These 5 stories prove that the souls in purgatory are listening, watching, and sometimes responding. Whether they come as protectors or as reminders of broken promises, one thing is certain: they never truly leave us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, remember that somewhere tonight, someone is lighting a candle, whispering a prayer, and inviting the unknown into their home. Will you be next? This has been Horror Sector. Sleep well if you can, and remember, some debts follow you beyond the grave.